This is the Art Beauty Podcast where we tell the real truth about the fake shit. And boy, do we have an episode for you today. I'm Amber, and today my fabulous and amazing co-host is Jan Marini. She's the founder of Jan Marini Skin Research. She's been in product research and development for how long, Jan?
Well over 40 years.
I don't even believe that. We can't believe that, but well over 40 years. Jan, I have to say, I respect you so much, so immensely. And I know our listeners do too, because your podcasts have consistently been the highest rated. So thank you for giving us your time.
It's such a pleasure. I was very excited to be here, and I look forward to it. And thank you.
I always look forward to it because you are such a wealth of knowledge. And I will tell you, my best friend, I recently turned her on to your skincare line, and she is in love with a capital L, and she has beautiful skin to begin with. But she's like, my skin is even more beautiful. She's been using your system and just kudos. And I was like, I know, I told you, Jan's is the best.
That's a really nice compliment. Thank you.
So, well, no, thank you. Well formulated products. I mean, you're the most consistent New Beauty award-winningest brand.
We've had more awards with New Beauty, 12 years in a row, best system.
And now I work with New Beauty, and I know what goes into that type of, when they select the rewards, it's testing tens of thousands of products, and it's not just the New Beauty editors, it's the New Beauty Brain Trust. It is doctors, dermatologists, experts like yourself. So kudos to you. It is a really big deal to have won that the most times.
Thank you.
12 times. Yeah. So congratulations.
Well, yeah. And actually, by the way, we just celebrated our 28th anniversary on July 1st.
Oh my goodness, really? Congrats. You have such a huge following. Whenever I do a podcast with you, I get people who are such Jan Marini fanatics, reaching out. We share the love with one another. So if you are listening to this right now, thank you. I love hearing it from you. Always reach out to me. You can reach out on Instagram at Art Beauty Podcast or at Amber Melt. I respond to them all, and I love celebrating Miss Jan Marini because she is phenomenal. Thank you.
My head's gonna be big now for the next month.
Oh my gosh, no. Well, you deserve it. So I love today. We are, the last time you were on the podcast, we've talked a lot about skincare, but we touched a little bit about aging, and I got so much feedback. Please do another one with Jan that I reached out to you. Because today I really want to talk about some of sort of the science of, aging skin, a little bit about nutrition, some of the drugs that are on the market, and some of the sort of new technologies and thoughts about aging. And there's nobody better to do it with than you. So if you don't mind to start, when it comes to aging, right? You are in the cutting edge, you're working with cutting edge researchers. What are some of the things that people are talking about now and some of the thoughts about aging, both internally and externally?
Well, this is going to sound like science fiction, but the premise is becoming more mainstream. You're going to hear about this more and more. And the fact is, we don't have to age. Now, that doesn't mean you're not going to die, but you don't have to age. It's not about living forever. Aging is actually considered to be a disease. Now, we don't think about it as a disease because everybody gets it. Right. So it's something that we think of as inevitable, but it really is something that we can avoid to a great extent. Now, I'm not an expert. And, when you look at this field, it's evolving so quickly. I don't know if there's any one expert anywhere, and I'm certainly not an expert, but there's so much information. I love to share the information, and it's a fun subject to talk about. And there are things that we can do today that really can make a huge difference.
So let's start with some of those things. And by the way, I think you're an expert. You are certainly so well informed on so many of these topics. Every time I talk to you, I'm like, oh my goodness, she's one of the smartest women I've ever met. So what are some of the things that you're hearing that are sort of within our control when it comes to aging?
So, we're probably a long way off from really, reversing aging, but there's all of these developments that are coming along. We're going to be able to target, to treat, to even reverse certain aspects of aging. So there are things that are within our control. Now, when it comes to aging, we really want to refer to it as health span as opposed to lifespan.
Okay.
And it's estimated that genetics, so things maybe that are not within our control, genetics only account for about 20% when it comes to health span. So think about that. That means that 80% is within our control. Now, the other thing to think about is, let's just say you live to be 90 or 95 years old. It's estimated that there could be at least 5 to 7 years of bad health. Maybe you're incapacitated. Your quality of life is really bad. So these are things that are within our control where we don't have to go through that. We can influence at least 80% of our health. And that it means that, well, first of all, it's such an enormous subject. And we're not even going to be able to scratch the surface.
Right.
This is not medical advice, but we can talk about the overall direction and just some really extraordinarily exciting advances.
Okay. All right. So, on that and with this idea of aging as a concept, what is it that, makes us age?
Well, I'll tell you, you can kind of break this into 3 categories.
Okay.
So I'm going to oversimplify. I'm going to make it really simple. So first of all, inflammation.
Yeah.
Now, if you look at medical journals and you look at all of these scientific publications, they talk about aging as an inflammatory disease and essentially we're all rusting to death, if you will. So inflammation contributes to heart disease. It contributes to arthritis. It's a causative factor in diabetes. It causes tissue degeneration. It damages our immune system, therefore our ability to repair. It causes cancer rates to rise. And when you look at aging skin, because we're going to tie this back into skin as well, it's not just external, it's not just internal, it's external as well. But when we look at aging skin, what do we say? We say that 90 to 95% of what we think of as inevitable aging is sun exposure. It's UV radiation. What is that? That's inflammation. Acne is an inflammatory disorder. Rosacea is an inflammatory disorder. Discoloration is whether you have melasma, chloasma, whether it's solar lentiginous, it's triggered by and exacerbated by inflammation, UV radiation. So that's number 1, that's inflammation. Okay. Number 2, compromise instructions from our DNA. Now I'm going to get more into that later, but think about this. When you're born, your epigenome is like this perfect CD. It doesn't have a scratch on it. And it has, if you were playing this, if it was music, it would have this incredible clarity. You could hear every single note. And of course, when you're born, everything is fresh, but you're in an anabolic state and you're constantly building and you're growing and your muscle mass and brain cells and all of that. Now, as you go along, you start to get little scratches on the CD because you're living and you're exposed to stress in the environment, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But you're still rebuilding beautifully. Now, when you get to be around the age of 20, maybe between 20, 23 years old, you're sort of fully cooked. And now you go into a catabolic state. So you're starting to slowly decline. You don't really notice it, but you are in a slow decline. And what's happened is you've got so many scratches on the CD that the music isn't being interpreted quite the same way.
Mm-hmm.
Still hear it, but doesn't have the same clarity. So you're not repairing the same way.
Right.
And this gets more exaggerated over time. It gets more exacerbated until eventually you really don't repair at all at the end of your life. So that's number 2. So compromise instructions from the DNA. Number 3 is the gradual shutdown of anti-aging genes. Now, these are called Sirtuins, and there's about 24 of them. Now, why do we remain in an anabolic state 20 to 25 years? We're growing and we're building. we're energetic, we're healthy. Why do we slip into a catabolic state? Well, again, stretches on the DNA, but also sirtuins play a major role in enabling our body to repair and to rebuild and to remain really healthy and vibrant and energetic. And sirtuins are made up of proteins. Now, I'm not going to pronounce this very well because it's nicotinamide, adenine, dinucleotide. Now, that's what they're made up of, these proteins. And you don't really need to remember that because I'll get back into that with something easier. So that's critical for their sirtuins to function. Now, I want you to think of sirtuins. Think about, you've got this car sitting in your driveway and it's absolutely in perfect condition.
Right.
But it doesn't have any gas in the tank. That would be like those proteins that I mentioned. And, or maybe it doesn't have something to put the pedal to the metal, which is something else that we're going to talk about. So sirtuins control DNA repair. They also have a major effect in controlling inflammation. They're absolutely critical for health, fitness, survival, your memory. They help to prevent senescent cells from accumulating. Now, so senescent cells, they don't divide and they don't die. Now, if you look at a crossword puzzle and, you see those black marks, those blanks in the crossword puzzle,
yes.
Okay, they sit there, they're like placeholders. So what senescent cells do is they take up the room of other healthy cells, but they don't divide. They're like zombie cells. You want to clear away senescent cells. You don't want those accumulating because they don't do anything. They're like placeholders. So when you eliminate these senescent cells, you actually can stimulate new tissue production. So if you can maintain and you can turn on sirtuins, it appears that they're going to be able to increase health span and also longevity. Now, sirtuins, actually turning them on, seems to mimic calorie restriction. Now, I'm going to get back into that again later.
Right.
Also,
we've talked about this before. Yeah.
So the only thing that they've actually found so far that actually increases lifespan, this is in animal studies, is calorie deprivation. So you don't deprive nutrition, but you deprive calories. That means you get really good nutrition, but these animals get very few calories.
Right.
They live to be about 150 years old, the equivalent of 150 human years. Now, there's about 10,000 humans that we know of in the US that practice this. And it's like we're probably, I don't know how they're getting the nutrition. They're probably taking everything and putting it in a blender, but they're existing at about 500 calories a day. We don't know if that's going to have the same effect. Now, I'll talk about something later where you can have the same effect, but we don't know because we'd have to do these studies for, generations to see if people actually do live longer, if they just think they're living longer because they're miserable.
And I want to point out something there, because when you're talking about this calorie restriction, look, we know that people, and I hate to say this, we've all, not say we all, but I've run into people who are clearly anorexic, right? Who have an eating disorder. That's not this, and I got to say, don't always look at the prime, like they're in prime health. However, that drastic calorie restriction doesn't mean that they're getting the correct nutrients. So making that distinction, it's not necessarily being skinny, it is calorie deprivation, but with correct nutrition.
So, when we look at eating disorders, a lot of times it involves bulimia. So people eat huge amounts of food that may be things like cookies and ice cream and things that certainly aren't, we wouldn't consider to be
delicious, right?
And then they expel them, and or they're literally not getting enough nutrition, and they're going for just long periods of time. So none of those things are good. So this is something that's very different.
Okay.
And there's a way that we can actually mimic that we can talk about that. And again, this is all really evolving, and that's why one of the reasons it's so exciting, because we're seeing that more data is coming out all the time, and a lot of it is actually being validated.
Okay, so let's talk about what are some of the things that we can address some of the issues that you talked about before, like that are within our control to address, or we can start with, nutrition and diet, since we were kind of on that.
Okay. So there's 4 areas. One would be diet. One is something called, that most people have heard of, called intermittent fasting. We'll hear a lot about that. Another one is supplementation and anti-aging drugs, of which there are some things that are here right now, or at least one thing. So starting with diet, again, this is kind of an oversimplification, but number 1, sugar is inflammatory.
Yeah, bad.
Now, I love sugar. I'm an absolute sugarholic. That doesn't mean that I eat sugar. I try to avoid it as much as possible, but there's just no doubt, I don't care how you cut it, it's inflammatory. And one of the things it does when we talk about our skin is sugar attaches to the proteins that make up collagen. Now, 80% of our dermis is collagen. Gives every skin its firm foundation. It helps to kind of, make the skin look much more taut and contoured. But 80% is collagen. And what it does is it attaches to that collagen and it makes it degrade faster. Now, when you're about 20 years old, your collagen starts degrading at about 1 to 2% or so a year. Right. More from sun exposure, your past sun exposure, your future sun exposure, environmental stress, you stress in your life, your diet, et cetera. But it can go much, much faster when you are having a high sugar or high carb diet, because it attaches to these proteins. And let me just tell you, you can actually change that, like either eliminate or lessen greatly sugar. And I'll talk more about that overall sugar. But in 2 weeks, studies have shown that in 2 weeks that you can have 25% of that bad collagen actually improve in just 2 weeks.
And is that by eliminating it altogether? Eliminating,
or at least getting it down to a level where it's minimal.
Now, Jan, because, I know so many of our listeners are probably like myself, and we like a roadmap. When you're talking about minimal, is there some way to measure that? Sugar's tricky because there's natural sugars, there's obviously processed sugars, but is there sort of a range we should be looking at?
Well, rather than give you a range, what it comes to, this is number 2, it's a low carb diet.
Ugh.
Okay.
Killing me.
So there's 2 things about a low carb diet. First, there's the glycemic load and there's the glycemic index. Now, I always say, you've heard me say this before, but the glycemic index is really simple, because if you look at a candy bar, it doesn't take a rocket science to know there's a lot of sugar in there. So that's the glycemic index. The glycemic load, though, is a little bit more tricky, because it's how food breaks down when your liver processes it. Okay. And controls how much glucose is going to go in every cell in your body. So what you want to do is you want to look at everything in total. Fruit has sugar. And while fruit is certainly better than eating a candy bar, it still is sugar. And our ancestors only got fruit in very tiny amounts at certain times of the year. So it's just looking at the total amount of carbs. And so what happens when you're talking about the glycemic index is that it's deceiving. You might say to yourself, well, I'm going to have a piece of whole wheat bread. It's got great grains in it and everything, and I'm the best piece of whole wheat bread in the entire world. That bread will turn into more sugar in your bloodstream, in your body, than eating a quarter cup of pure sugar.
What?
So it's how it's processed. That's the glycemic load.
Okay.
It's how it's processed. So what happens, let's say you sit down and you have a nice pasta dinner and some garlic bread and a nice dessert. That is a huge high glycemic load. You're dumping huge amounts of sugar. And not only can that make you insulin resistant, meaning that you're going to put on a lot more weight than if you ate a different type of food, but also it causes your insulin levels to spike. And one of the ways that your insulin levels come back down is you produce more testosterone. And you know what happens when you do that? You break out.
Gotcha. No, it's so funny. As I've gotten older, I talk about this with my girlfriends. It used to be, and I hate to say this, you'd go out for a night, you'd have one too many drinks and you felt terrible. For me now, I get that same thing if I go out and I eat, I don't want to say good or bad food. I hate to say that, but if I'm eating something that maybe is super high carb, if I go and I have that Italian dinner that you just mentioned with a little tiramisu for dessert, I feel terrible the next day. Not mentally, not like the guilt of it, but like physically in my body, it's really, really tough. I'm starting to
maybe
notice.
you feel bloated. Maybe you don't feel as alert.
Just sluggish.
So
Yeah. Like alert.
a lot of inflammation. So it's low carb. So, one of the ways to look at this is you go into a grocery store, a lot of grocery stores, they say, stay on the perimeter. What's on the perimeter? The perimeter are vegetables. The perimeter is things like eggs, which is a great source of protein. Whether you're a meat eater or you're not a meat eater, but beef and chicken and lamb and all those kinds of things. But again, very, very low carb. The lower carb overall, the better. We're seeing that more and more. We're seeing more and more validation in that whole area. And so the other thing is, when we talk about diet, another thing to keep in mind, because again, back to the skin, one thing that we know for certain, milk causes acne.
Yeah. I cut out milk forever ago. Personally.
It's not because of the hormones we give cows. It's because we milk cows when they're pregnant. So if a cow is pregnant in the wild, it pushes the calf away. It doesn't allow it to nurse. And it has to do with steroidal hormones in the milk. So that's milk, that's ice cream, that is yogurt. And keep in mind, it's also, you may be thinking, well, I'm getting these great whey protein drinks that I'm drinking all the time. Whey protein is even more concentrated in these steroidal hormonal substances because whey is more concentrated. So you're getting more concentration of the milk. Whey is also used when you have non-fat milk. They put more whey in there to make it look so it doesn't look so watery looking.
Right.
And so, you can have collagen protein, you can have egg protein. You don't have to have whey protein drinks, whey protein bars. So keep that in mind, because that is something that's evolving as well. And a lot of derms find anecdotally when they put their patients on, eliminate the dairy and put them on a low glycemic or a low carb diet, that they're seeing much less inflammation, less pustule count. The acne is a lot more responsive. And so with adult females.
I want to stop you there. It's so interesting with the milk. I was blowing my nose like crazy. I went to an allergist. They gave me the full test of allergies. I wasn't allergic to anything but dust. But I knew this was not a normal, but I was having 2 cups of coffee every morning with milk in it. And when I cut that out, it went away. So my thing to everybody listening is, your bodies and the doctors sometimes, look, doctors definitely know what they're talking about, but just because you might not be like an allergic to it, it's still, your body can be reacting to it.
This is so true. And think about this, everybody. So from an anthropological, when we look at anthropological nutrition, we were designed to nurse from the time maybe you're born until as late as 4, 5, 6 years old. And then after that, you don't get milk.
Right.
In the US, we drink more milk than probably just about anywhere in the world. And of course, as the world becomes more westernized, they start to follow what we do. But in general, the rest of the world does not drink milk. We are huge milk drinkers. We're not designed to drink milk after a certain age. Right.
I went to an event where it was like a high school, not reunion, but friends, college kids got together and some of their parents, and we were looking around and I was like, oh my gosh, how is it that all of my guy friends are giants, 6, 7 feet tall, or almost 7 feet tall. And then I saw their parents and they were little itty bitty. And one of the mothers was like, you know what? I'm convinced it was because my son would come home and just drink milk. And all of the steroids and hormones made him grow so much, because we couldn't figure it out. We're like, wait a minute, all the parents are pretty short or normal height. And all these boys, who came up in like the 80s, 90s are giants. And food for thought, literally.
Well, there's a saying that milk is designed to make 3,000 pound cows. So.
Oh yeah. Good point. Also, well, yeah, good point. So, okay. So dairy, so I didn't mean to stop you. You were saying that dairy is not good. We're talking about, when you talk about low carb, going back to that, because there, you read these nutrition blogs, or I always do, and they still seems to be a lot of support for the Mediterranean diet. Mm-hmm. But when you're talking low carb, are you talking like keto low carb, like extremely low carb?
Well, it can be keto. Now, personally, I don't do keto, and I do eat low carb. I don't do keto because keto, in order to, it's really actually not as much protein. It's still a lot of protein, but not as much protein, but a lot of fat.
Right.
And so to go complete keto, a lot of times that fat comes from dairy,
Right.
and cheese and things like that, and coconut oil and different things. So I would say that maybe I kind of tend to go toward keto, but I do eat very low carb. But I eat lots of leafy greens. I eat lots of broccoli, lots of asparagus, lots of Brussels sprouts. I'm a meat eater. I love
Me
meat.
too.
And I eat lots of avocados. I mean, oh my
Same.
gosh, lots of avocados. So I get a lot of healthy fat. And I try to get a variety in my diet, and I do eat fruit. You know, I don't eat fruit, a huge amount of fruit, but I eat fruit. I enjoy fruit. So again, it's keeping that down, just that carb level down in general.
Gotcha. Okay. But not to like but just sort of mindful low carb eating, if that's a thing, not necessarily super strict keto low carb.
So, and I think keto actually is a good way for a lot of people to eat. And one of the reasons that keto was actually developed in the first place was for individuals, children that had certain brain disorders.
Oh.
There are certain brain disorders where literally these individuals, it's literally zero carbs, and that they're actually able to survive and not die, or they're able to actually have their intellect is greater and better. And in fact, they're finding in some cases, now when we talk about autism, for example, autism is a really wide catch-all. Right. And to say that there's one thing that's going to help it or one thing that causes it, I think is foolhardy. But it does appear in some cases that keto can be very helpful for individuals or children that have autistic issues. And there's other sort of brain disorders and things where it may be helpful. But for me personally, it's low carb.
It's low carb.
Do I occasionally have sugar? Do I occasionally have dessert? You bet.
Right. Okay. Thank you. Right. We're human. Gotcha. Okay.
And and
getting back to a human, but smartly.
Yeah. Well, sometimes I want chocolate, and it doesn't do it for me to eat 90%, chocolate, because it tastes like medicine. Right. So, yes, I do that sometimes. And like you, there are times where I overdo it and I don't feel that great.
Terrible. Right. Oh yeah.
So chocolate is very good for you. Okay. If you use it in cooking, it's wonderful. It's great. It's not the chocolate, it's the sugar.
Gotcha.
And if you're eating milk chocolate, then of course you're getting the dairy
dose of badness.
But sugar is also a stimulant. If you haven't had sugar for a while, and then you have a lot of sugar, oh my gosh, my sleep goes off for 2 or 3 nights.
Oh yeah.
Sleep because it's so stimulating.
You mentioned before intermittent fasting, and I've got friends who do it, but I've heard mixed reviews on how it is for women.
So here's what it appears that intermittent fasting does. And I'm a big fan of intermittent fasting. And actually I've done it for years and I didn't even know I was doing it. So when we talk about calorie deprivation, what we believe is that intermittent fasting actually gives you the same benefit as if you were to do calorie deprive yourself of calories. And so essentially the way that intermittent fasting works is that you don't eat within a period of time that's, say, anywhere from about 14 to 12 to 14 hours or something, somewhere in that. Everybody does, some people do it a little bit differently. But let's just say you have your dinner at 6 o'clock, for argument's sake. Then you would not have eat again until maybe 12 noon.
Right.
So you're talking about that's about 16 hours.
Yeah.
So then between 12 noon and 6 o'clock, it's not about depriving yourself. It's about eating in that window. And some people and some researchers, I will tell you, they eat one big meal a day.
Right.
And find that in terms of their blood work, their health, that it works very well for them. I probably something small. I've never been a breakfast person, so that's why I say that I probably intermittent fast for years. And mothers always used to say that breakfast is the most important meal of the day. I've always hated breakfast. I'm not a breakfast person. I just don't like to eat until around 12 o'clock or so. And that's really when I get hungry. And then maybe I'll have an avocado and maybe I'll have some eggs or something like that. But I like my big meal in the evening.
Right.
And I like to just sit and kind of luxuriate over it. And that's when I eat my big meal. So, but intermittent fasting is that window when you don't eat. Now, why do we think this works? Because we believe it actually turns on certain sirtuins.
Okay.
Now, what is it that it does that it turns on sirtuins? Well, I'm not sure that it's fully understood, but it seems to cause a certain amount of mild stress. Keep in mind, we talk about stress as being really bad, and it is bad. And I use the analogy, if I step on a snail, that is a lot of stress. That snail is not going to recover. Way too much stress. But very mild stress actually can trigger certain processes or make the body actually function better in certain respects. Okay. So this appears to turn on certain sirtuins. And it is believed that it may actually mimic calorie deprivation.
And again, the sirtuins can help with they kind of help our cells function.
They're anti-aging genes. They're anti-aging genes. So they keep things from shutting down. They help the body to actually, again, clear away senescent cells. So there's repair, rebuilding, that you're just much more healthy, much more vibrant. Your body just acts younger.
Okay, so we've got intermittent fasting, low carb. These are all things that can help us in, I'm going to say optimizing the anti-aging, because anti-aging is such a tough thing. You're going to, right? So optimize the way that we age and our cells age. You mentioned anti-aging drugs. And I know that we touched on this before, and I said, I'm going to bring you back, but let's talk about that because.
Well, I'm going to talk about supplementation first and then anti-aging.
Okay.
But I want to mention something. I also have these sort of mixed emotions, I should say, about the term anti-aging, because there's certain things that I absolutely love about getting older in terms of how I look at the world and your knowledge and just the wisdom that you've gotten over the years. But on the other hand, you want to be young, you want to feel young and healthy and vibrant. You want to be relevant. And so I always say that I do this as much for myself as for anyone else, because I'm selfish. And I don't think that I'm different from anyone else. But I turned 70 in December.
I can't believe that. Amazing. Yes.
So when I talk about this, these are things that I don't just, preach, but I actually try to practice. And I really do this research because I want to experience life this way. And supplementation is another area that's really controversial. And the reason is because if you take a magazine on supplementation, or, for example, I get Life Extension magazine, and Life Extension makes some very good nutritional supplements, and they do a lot of research. But I'm telling you, if you look at this magazine, you're going to think, oh my God, I need to take 100 different things because everything they talk about is better than the last thing. And a lot of times the studies that they do are really not necessarily in-depth studies. You're not going to have a pharmaceutical firm go and study a nutritional supplement that they can't patent, that's been in, the marketplace forever. And so they're not going to put $50 or $100 million into it. And so it's an area where we're seeing a lot more research, but sometimes it's hard to really get data that it has a lot of validation. So there's two things that I think make an enormous difference. And I take quite a bit of supplementation, but there's two things that I really think have some very good validation. Now, one is something called NAD.
Okay,
NAD is it's actually called NAD plus. So capital N as in Nancy, capital A, capital D as in dog, with a plus sign.
Excuse me.
Now, that is known as nicotinamide riboside. The reason why it's important, remember I said those proteins that your sirtuins need to keep going? Okay, which was nicotinamide, adenine, nucleotide. Okay.
Yes.
This is a precursor to it. It's the closest precursor. It turns into it.
Okay. So it is feeding the sirtuins.
So, and it's the closest thing we've seen. So there's other things that are way down the food chain, but this one is right next to it. And it's actually been shown to increase these proteins.
Okay.
So this is something that we seem to have quite a bit of validation. So you kind of think about it as gasoline for that car sitting in the driveway for those sirtuins, and they can't run without it. Now, there's a number of reasons why the actual nicotinamide adenine nucleotide is not available just to take it that way. It's experimental. And I don't recommend people going on a website and finding it, and just there's probably some issues about it that maybe really haven't been worked out yet. But this precursor is really good. And it has been shown to significantly raise NAD levels. Now, it's sold by a lot of different companies because there's a patent. So whether you buy it from company A or company B, it's the same thing. What you want to do is you just don't want to get it where there's a lot of other things added into it. Like sometimes companies make theirs sound like it's wonderful because they put in this vitamin, they put something else with it. Just get straight NAD.
Okay, NAD plus?
Right.
Straight NAD
like,
plus.
For example, there's a company out there called Trugen. I think they may have originated, but their Life Extension has it. There's just lots of companies out there that have it. Just get some, reputable company. And most researchers say you start with about 300 milligrams a day and you work up to around 1,000. And I'm not aware that there are any, quote, side effects or anything that would, be prohibitive. Okay. The second one is resveratrol.
We've heard all about this, right?
Okay. So
Grapes and wine.
resveratrol is a chemical that's in grapes.
Right.
But you're not going to get enough of it by eating grapes. And resveratrol is also higher in wine, typically in France, where it's made the old-fashioned way. I don't know what it is that they do that makes the resveratrol.
Stomping on the grapes, pressing them down, right?
You'd have
drink
to
a lot of wine. Right.
But you'd have to,
Jan, I'm gonna
1,000 glasses a day.
I want to make sure I'm just running a little bit behind on time. So is there a brand of resveratrol that you like?
Yes, actually there is. It is called Longevinix.
Longevinix. Okay.
Longevinix.
Okay, Longevinix.
NEX, Longevinix.
Longevinix.
In my opinion, because one of the things that happens with resveratrol is your digestive processes tend to kind of destroy it, or it's not bioavailable. And I have to tell you, the gentleman who invented resveratrol, who discovered it in this manner, he actually sold it to a pharmaceutical firm for just under $1 billion.
Ooh,
now, what they're doing with it, it was supposed to be something that might go through the FDA. At some point, maybe that's going to be available as a prescription because it's believed to be able to have anti-tumor activity that is highly anti-inflammatory. It's heart protective, it's brain protective. It helps prevent insulin resistance, protective possibly against Alzheimer's. So it's believed to activate the Sirtuin-1 gene. So that's why this is important. But again, the closest we can come to it is maybe through some supplements that might be somewhat beneficial. Now, in terms of anti-aging drugs, okay. So right now, there actually is something in the marketplace. This is a drug that you can get your hands on. It's been around since 1972. It's been taken by gazillions of people and for type 2 diabetes, and it's called metformin.
Right.
Now, metformin. Now, metformin actually was discovered in the lily plant in 1922, and then it went into prescription use in 1972. It does one thing and one thing only. What it does is it has an effect on, there's an enzyme in your liver that kind of tends to become compromised over time, even if you don't have diabetes, but it tends to keep all of that glucose from being overloaded into your body and your cells and everything. And they've done studies on over 14,000 people. Now think about this. Let's just say that you're elderly, and let's say you're a couch potato, and let's say you have diabetes, and let's say you don't exercise, and let's say your diet's really bad, but you're taking metformin. You'll probably live 3 to 5 years longer than you or me, even though we're doing all the things we think we're supposed to be doing. So metformin appears to be able to be protective against Alzheimer's, It's been shown to be protective against many diseases. We believe it may extend lifespan. It significantly lessens inflammation, is protective against heart disease, cancer, Alzheimer's. And also a lot of researchers, and here's what's interesting. Every researcher that I've talked to, my own personal physician, who I found out when I wanted to start taking it, I found out she'd been taking it for a long time. None of them have diabetes, but they all talked about their energy level, just feeling more vibrant. Your skin, because again, you're not getting as much of the glucose attaching to your collagen. Overall feeling of health and well-being. And again, it's believed to turn on certain sirtuins.
So it's all coming back to the Sirtuins. Jan, I wish I had 1,000 hours to talk with you. Like I said, I know you say you're not an expert, but I certainly think you are. And again, so sorry, I'm having to wrap this up for time right now, which I hate to do. If people want to know more about, you've got such interesting information on your website. If they want to know more about your skincare line, where can they go?
Okay, well, they can go to our website, janmarini.com. And also, we don't have time to get into it, but on the website, it starts off with the system, but on the website, the Age Intervention Regeneration Booster is all connected with everything that I'm talking about today. So, amazing. And that's something you use with the system.
Okay.
And, we can talk about that at some point in the future.
I'm going to bring you back. I will hunt you down and say, Jan, please come back. Thank you so much for being on with us. You bring up such interesting things, and it really is an interesting way to think about how we can sort of control certain aspects to help our aging process. I want to just thank you always for being here with us.
Thank you. And everybody who listening, watching, I thank you because I wouldn't be here without you. So thank you so much. And it's been such a pleasure. Till next time.
All the Jan fans out there, big up to you. If you have questions you want me to pass along to Jan or her team, I'm always happy to do that. You can email me at hello@artbeautypodcast.com. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube at Art Beauty Podcast. And as always, we will see you next Tuesday, maybe feeling a little younger and better. Bye.
Bye.